Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ghost Show. Alrighty. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good morning, wherever it is where you are. I am Professor Christopher McLaughlin. I am the creative pit boss of Ghost Show Press. And because of the obvious threat to untold numbers of citizens due to the crisis that is even now developing, this podcast will remain on the air day and night, or at least for the next hour. This podcast and hundreds of other radio and TV stations throughout this part of the country are pooling their resources through an emergency network hookup to keep you informed of all the developments. At this hour, we repeat, these are the facts as we know them. I am joined by three fantastic individuals to discuss, as you probably have already deduced, zombie cinema, with a particular emphasis and love for the man that primarily gives us a reason to talk about zombie cinema, George A. Romero, and what is arguably his masterpiece, Dawn of the Dead. So joining me today on the Ghost Show to discuss this, just moving around the Brady Bunch grid here, is my longtime friend Ethan Parker of the from the legendary Confessions of a Movie Snob podcast. Hello, Ethan.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Very welcome. Glad to have you here. And then moving down to our second row is Matthew Dawkins, the man who has brought cinematic horror to one of my favorite media, tabletop role playing. And congratulations,
dummies,
yes.
dummies, as the professor would say on Dawn of the Dead. It's very lovely to be here.
All righty, and thank you. And Matthew was one of the contributors to our Trangressive Horror anthology, and he wrote about, not coincidentally, Dawn of the Dead. And certainly we would have no anthology to talk about if it were not for fine people like John Cohorn, who is in our last block here. John is one of our super backers, and as such gets to be on the show and pick a topic. And John twisted my arm just ever so slightly to get me to talk about zombies. So welcome, John.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Very glad to have you. And here's my chance to publicly thank you for making the dream come true, for making my book a thing. Thank you.
Happy to help.
All righty. Okay, so here we are in the year 2021 talking about zombie movies, a thing that dates back at least to 1932 with the indie classic White Zombie with Bela Lugosi. And here we are. We have just as zombies have an endless appetite for human flesh, the world, seem to have an endless appetite for zombie movies. Why are we still talking about zombie movies after 90 years? Gentlemen, anybody want to speculate why we're having this conversation and the fact that it's really fun?
Well, I think much like most horror movie media, zombies go through peaks and valleys of popularity. And if you were to be, I suppose, a little artistic and psychological about it, if the two can be married, I guess certain elements of society can sort of reflect zombie media or vice versa. And so people are more drawn to the apocalyptic feeling of, I guess, untold masses coming to devour them or similar at certain points in history. And certainly you could argue that things like consumerism and some might say things like globalization or the Red Scare, depending on when you are, might all have contributed to certain heights of zombie mania. But likewise, when those things aren't there, people seem to gravitate more toward villains that have more, I guess, agency, more voice to them. And I don't know. I don't know where we sit right now when it comes to zombie media, and I wonder how much of that is down to The Walking Dead's very lengthy duration, whether that has kind of eaten up all of the entire audience that could exist for zombie media has kind of been siphoned off. I don't know how true that is, but we certainly seem to be seeing fewer zombie movies now than we were, let's say, 10, 15 years ago, when there was a new wave of zombie movies like 28 Days Later, remake of Dawn of the Dead. We still get lots of those things, but not quite as many, because it's all migrated to television with Walking Dead, Z Nation, Black Summer, and so on. But yeah, I think it's great that we can identify certain peaks for zombie media, and we can say that they never die; they always come back, which is very appropriate. You just have to you just have sometimes to wait 10, 15 years, or maybe a bit longer, and zombies come back. Whereas someone like Dracula took about 40 years. It took a long time for vampires to be popular again, really, in the classic way. But anyway, that's me rambling on.
All right. Well, before we get back to our question, I have to introduce our latest participant to this, Mr. Aid Smith. Welcome, Aid.
Hello. How are we doing?
Well, Aid, for those of you that might not be familiar, is a fabulous contributor to the world of tabletop role playing, having worked for a company I no longer discuss publicly, and also currently working on the current iteration of the Star Trek game. But don't let that happy, optimistic future fool you. This fabulous gentleman contributed a great essay on John Carpenter's The Thing to Transgressive Horror. So, welcome, Aid.
Hello.
Okay. All righty. So yes. All right. So other thoughts on why we're still talking about zombies after 90 years?
Well, so I think there are a couple of different things going on. I think that with movies like Night of the Living Dead, it kind of reinvigorated the genre and definitely moved it in a different direction. And since that time, it has become an easy go-to template for people to explore, social issues. But it also, for better or for worse, has made a pretty low bar of entry for aspiring horror directors. Throughout the 80s, the 90s, and on up even today, people have made very, very cheap zombie movies. Some of them good, many of them not. And so because it is something that people can easily access, both as a viewer and as a creative, I think that keeps it in people's minds and kind of as part of the zeitgeist. But also because no matter what problems society is facing, it can easily be applied to the zombies versus survivors template. And just as I was going back and watching Dawn of the Dead to prepare for this afternoon, I will say that it hits a little bit different watching it in 2021 than it even did just a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's any good zombie movie, it's not really about the zombies. It's about the people, the people in it. And I've always found that the zombie movies typically use the zombie, the zombie MacGuffin as a springboard to other things, social commentary or whatnot. They sort of plaster it in a little veneer of, we're making a zombie picture, but we're going to talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about race, and we're talk about all these other things. And a good zombie movie, I think, definitely does that because. Ultimately, you can only get so much out of a horde of shambling undead before you have interesting characters, interesting situations that pop up that you need to that get you thinking. Some exciting, some fun action, but then also some going back to the original Night of the Living Dead. Thinking about different relations between different groups of people, race relations, gender relations, that sort of thing. I think that definite aspect of it will always be relevant to society and relevant to everybody. And just the fact that they can slap some zombies in there, I think, kind of sneaks it past some people that wouldn't be interested in it, saying, "I'm going to go see a zombie picture," and you go and you learn a few things here and there too. So.
Right. Hey, why are we still watching zombie movies after 90 years?
Again, like you were saying, the idea of having the zombies as a kind of just an endless wave of bad guys they're more of a backdrop figure. The idea that you're telling a story about, like, I'm trying to think of Day of the Dead is more about the antagonism between the two human groups in the mall than is the zombies. The zombies are there just as backdrops, effectively. They're there to chase you into the tiny little room, and then you can have your arguments and your discussions about whatever you want to have your discussion about. So yeah, I think that's the thing. I think it's almost a good way of basically just forcing people to have a conversation. Yeah, because there's nowhere else to go. We can sit down and discuss why X, Y, Z people deserve to survive, other people don't deserve to survive, why I'm better than you, why all this kind of stuff going on as well. So I think that's probably what it is. I think that's you're seeing more of that nowadays than you are, even back in the old days when you used to see the old zombie films. And The Walking Dead especially, I mean, I stopped watching Walking Dead after about 4 or 5 series, but again, it was 90% of the time was about the survivors. It wasn't about the zombies, but it was always them being outside the walls that meant if you wanted to wipe out 50% of your cast, just open the door up and that was gone. So that's a good reason as well. So there you go.
Isn't it amazing how much tastier and slower the cast members with like bigger contract demands suddenly
Yes,
got?
yeah. All of a sudden, the ones that demand more money just having to get limps and stuff. Yes.
Right.
As almost a lifelong fan of the zombie genre, it's been really strange to me to see that develop. Back in the mid 90s, a good friend of mine and I had these grandiose ideas for a public access show that we were going to put on that was centered around, people trying to survive a zombie apocalypse. And we had lined up musicians and special effects people, and ultimately it just didn't happen. But it was a great idea. And so for years I was wondering, what would a zombie television show be like? And when that came on, I was so excited about it. And for the first few seasons, I watched it religiously. And it's been very strange for me to go about dreaming about having a zombie show on access television to that being like one of the biggest things in the country, and then me getting bored of it.
Well, now Matthew raised a great point, and I'll give him the chance to address this first if he likes. But are we officially at peak zombie or past zombie? Matthew, do you think the genre is heading for another fallow period?
Not sure. I feel like we're on the tail end if we are at the peak, only because zombies have been so pervasive for around a decade now. And so, yeah, it feels unlikely that it can sustain itself in interesting ways. That, I'm sure there are plenty of artistic people out there that can come up with interesting new ways to present zombies, but there comes an audience saturation point where they're not prepared to buy in to new takes on zombies. They just need a break. Now, and you could say this about a lot of different types of horror. Obviously, torture porn had its period in vogue, as it were, and lots of body horror stuff in the late 80s, early 90s that kind of went away, that sort of thing. So if we accept that this kind of thing is somewhat cyclical or phased, I would say that zombie media must surely be tapering off for a while. But, I could stand to be argued with. Obviously, there are some directors who are coming out with things like, what was it? Zack Snyder, was it Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead recently?
Yes.
Which,
yes.
I'm not a massive fan of, but he makes this movie and then he's all, well, I'm going to make another 2. and Black Summer does amazingly well on Netflix, despite the fact it's a spin-off of a show that wasn't very well regarded. In the case of Z Nation, it had a big cult following. I liked it, but I can't say that it was a appreciation that filtered out across the masses in the same way as AMC's Walking Dead. But either way, I think that barring something unforeseen, that in the next couple of years we must be going back to something like slasher movies soon, or more or even going back into more occult horror, because you've had a slow trundle of Insidiouses and Conjurings, and just eking out, but not that many. You see one every 6 months or so. It'll just be another scary woman's face on a poster with black eyes or something like that, and the kind of movie it's going to be. But it still isn't quite as oversaturated as zombies have been, in my view.
So we've got the second of the Friday the 13th movies coming pretty soon, haven't we? So we're splashing back into Sasha territory again. So hopefully we may see more, we may not.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Halloween saw a really interesting
Halloween.
revival.
Sorry, yeah, wrong one.
But I was very excited then to wonder if Friday the 13th was getting renewed. But I think due to licensing, there's a lot of a mess in the background of Friday the 13th.
There's ongoing legal issues that still haven't been resolved with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking of Friday the 13th, Halloween Kills, isn't it? The new one that's coming.
Yes.
So
yeah.
We've had two of those in the space of 5 years or so. I mean, that's pretty good going for it. So,
well, and Halloween, again, not a zombie movie, so very much off topic, but it's at the same time, I guess you could call Michael Myers a zombie if you really wanted to push it. That's a really interesting case where the Rob Zombie Halloween movies went to show that people really weren't interested in slasher movies. Now, it may well have been that his Halloween movies just weren't very good, and
I would posit that more than a disinterest in slasher films.
But there weren't many other slasher movies around either. So I guess anyone looking to do a litmus test on slasher movies would have looked at the only slasher movies out there, thought, well, no one likes these, so this isn't going to make bank. And then all of a sudden, within 5 years of the last Rob Zombie Halloween movie, we get yet another Halloween reboot, but this one is actually incredibly well regarded. So, I hope that I understand they're planning on doing Hellraiser from the beginning again, which
there's
got to
two
be better
separate
than doing
lines.
Hellraiser 12 or whatever.
There's two separate lines on Hellraiser that are going on right now. One of them is a feature that's being directed by David Bruckner, who did The Ritual and The Night House. The other is an HBO Max series that is being shepherded by, if I remember correctly, David Gordon Green, who did the first Halloween of this new series.
Please tell me that's a sitcom. Please tell me it's about Pinhead moving into a suburban neighborhood and being
Pinhead moves
like a
in
warrior version of the Munsters.
Next door to Julia and Frank, and just keeps overhearing their passionate lovemaking and thinks, I'm going to get these two, stopping me from going anywhere.
I think you just coined the title too. Pinhead moves in.
Yeah, they are driving me to need to hammer nails into my head because of the noisiness of their sex. And just like that, we don't need Hellraiser 2 or 3 to show us that Pinhead was at some point a Great War officer and all of that. He was just a very angry suburban neighbor.
His own personal hell.
Yeah.
So Ethan, I was listening to your comment on that, and it reminded me of the fact that when we were doing Confessions of a Movie Snob, we hit so many different genres. So I thought I would ask you a genre-based question if you don't mind.
Sure.
Your breakdown of the zombie film and talking about how you can make all this political commentary. So if you're just out of film school and you're going to change the world through cinema, you can do that in a zombie film and know that you're going to make your money back off the people who want to see people getting their guts eaten. Best film genre or best film genre?
Well, I think horror is definitely an easy genre to do. It's tried and true. It's been around forever. And if you have a story to tell, especially with a zombie movie, the buy-in is pretty easy to go. Pretty easy. It's like it's a zombie picture. And, it's an easy to buy in. Everyone knows what to expect from it. Everyone knows that what the zombies are. I mean, Zombie Land and Land of the Dead and all that's like it's one way or another. It's you're seeing it. It's zombies. It's The Walking Dead. You're not talking. Well, do I need to understand the rules behind these werewolves or these vampires or these wizards or whatever? It's a zombie. I know what it is, and it's pretty basic. You destroy the brain and it dies. Done. And it's an easy thing to put in there as an antagonist. And really, I think the difference between those types of within other types of horror movies and slasher films, vampire movies, werewolf movies, those sorts of things, is the antagonist is generally going to be a single entity or a group of entities that's very powerful. But with the zombies, like one zombie, not a threat, but 1,000 zombies, that's a problem. And that sort of allegory comes into of it's like, well, we can handle these guys one at a time, but eventually they're this horrible concept of this racial injustice or whatever you want to sort of peg in there. That's going to come barging through those mall doors at some point. Those are going to give way, and then we're going to have to deal with not just one, but 100 of these things. And in that case, as opposed to other movies, slasher films, werewolf movies, there's a ticking clock because eventually these things aren't going to stop coming because they just don't. It's a force of nature at that point. It's going to get in. They're going to get in. They're going to break down those doors. You can't just sit here and lock yourself inside a mall for the next 10 years. It's like you're going to have to figure something out eventually. And I think that aspect of the zombie movies definitely lends itself a bit more to I think survival horror is something that was born completely out of this out of zombie literature, the zombie genre, and definitely lends itself to that. I don't know if I answered your question, but I kind of went off on a tangent. But hey, there we go.
We are all about tangents here. We live on tangents like zombies live on brains.
But that's what I find compelling, or at least interesting, from zombie movies. And this is coming from a guy who's not the biggest horror fan, but I think I do like zombie movies more than a lot of others. I mean, I would boil it down. I would argue that any kind of movie where you have that type of antagonist protagonist, like I would argue that if you boil down the movie Aliens to its basic concepts, that it's a zombie movie. It's got a science fiction gloss on it. It's really shiny and neat, and there's pulse rifles going off and power loaders, but the aliens really aren't doing anything. They don't have an evil motivation. Zombies don't have an evil motivation. They just kind of are. They're like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. They're just eating. They're existing. They're just trying to do their thing. Whereas, like in another horror film, the slasher wants to kill people. The vampire wants to, the vampire isn't mindless. It knows what it's doing. The werewolf wants to, do its thing. But zombies have that sort of aspect of sympathy to them. Of this is beyond their control. They aren't choosing to do this. They have to do this because that's just their compulsion. That's what they are doing to really survive. They don't know anything else. And so you find yourself watching these movies and going out, I'm afraid of these things, but it's harder to get to that point of, I hate this villain or I hate this specific zombie, because it's just a zombie doing its thing. And I think that makes it a very unique subgenre in horror of itself, is that zombie thing. Not only do you have the survivors you have to worry about, but you have this sort of oppressive miasma that sort of lingers out, this cloud that lingers outside of everything, knowing that this is going to come crashing in at some point. We can sit here in this nice community and be happy for some time, but those things never quit. So at some point, one's going to get in, and at some point, someone's going to make a mistake, and everything's going to come crashing down. So.
All right. Okay. All right. So I wanted to give everybody, since the whole point of transgressive horror was to give some fabulous people a chance to gush about their favorite films. We like everybody a chance to talk about their favorite zombie movie and maybe talk about a favorite that maybe our audience not familiar with. And John, you came up with the idea to do a Dawn of the Dead podcast, so I thought maybe only fair to give you a chance to talk about why you love Dawn. Why is Dawn such a great movie?
Well, so Dawn of the Dead is, regardless of genre, my favorite movie. I won't contend that it's the best film ever made, but it is my favorite movie. And up until these recent viewings, it was almost like cinematic comfort food. I think that for me, I've always been predisposed to Romero because my first experience with horror away from my mom and dad's house when I was about 8 years old at a birthday party, this kid's mom showed us Night of the Living Dead and Creep Show back to back. I couldn't sleep right for a week, but it forever changed me, and it made me a horror fan. It wasn't until years later that I saw Dawn of the Dead, and immediately something about it just drew me in. And I think part of the reason that I love Dawn so much, and part of the reason that, given the opportunity, my preferred cut is what's referred to as the can cut or the extended cut. It's basically like George's first pass at a work print, from what I understand. Is that it gives you more time with the characters, because these characters do feel real, and they feel human. They're flawed. They make terrible decisions. They behave the way that a lot of us would probably behave. And so you get more time with them in this great setting of like peak mall. There's moments of humor, there's moments of sadness, there's a lot of just passable effects, but some really, really great gore gags from Tom Savini and his crew. To me, it just hits all the points in what I want in a zombie movie. Now, of course, I've got many other favorites that aren't necessarily from Romero's canon, but I think that they all, to some degree, have been inspired by what he did there with Dawn.
Indeed. All righty. Now, Matthew, I have to ask you about Dawn of the Dead because you did such a fabulous job talking about it. And
Thank you.
And you're very welcome. I love everything I got on the book, but I had a special amount of affection for the people that took films like Dawn that have been written about and able to mine fresh material from it. And I really love the fresh perspective that you brought to Dawn. And I was wondering if you would mind speaking a little bit about how Dawn is freshly relevant in the 2019s, 2020s, 2021s, especially the political and cultural sides of it. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say some political things that will hopefully not upset too many people. But just my opinion on the movie and how it is relevant today. As you mentioned, it is a movie that's been mined to death for subtext and just plain text, and the consumerism aspect of it has always been pretty pronounced. George A. Romero was always pretty clear that this is a movie about people who go to the shopping mall. That's basically it. Now we don't have that anymore. And that's part of why I think, for me, this movie stands out so strongly, because it has a very strong internet feel, a very strong social media feel of the mindlessly clicking through things, the mindlessly doom scrolling, the mindlessly engaging with whatever's put in front of you. Oh, look, another YouTube video. Oh, I should check out this TikTok, and so on and so forth. Because better that than actually do something with your time, And I'm not saying that with any judgment. I'm as guilty of that as everyone else who's got access to the internet. But Dawn of the Dead obviously presents that within the framework of a shopping mall, which was pretty new at the time, a mega mall like the Monroeville one. Now, what I think is, well, that kind of context has changed, although I guess the message remains the same. You have humans, ostensibly the protagonists of Dawn of the Dead, who basically succumb to the same very base urges as the antagonists, the zombies. And we have that exact same thing going on now with... we like to all think we're the leads of our own story, but here we are just engaging with other people's all the time. The political aspect of Dawn of the Dead is what I think is probably most pertinent, and the thing that hasn't changed, that it's the thing that I guess people mistakenly felt went away at a certain time, and that comes down to matters of things like racism, sexism, the very much good old boys attitude that exists in the first third of the movie. It's interesting. People watch Dawn of the Dead and they obviously think of it as the shopping mall zombie movie, and yet it takes about 40 minutes for them to get into it. Before then, there's a huge amount of build-up, and it's not even a long movie by modern standards. I mean, as John pointed out, there's lots of different cuts. I think a couple of them go over 2 hours in length. The Dario Argento one almost definitely does, because that's the one with all the ridiculous amounts of gore in it. But when you have the SWAT raid near the beginning of the movie, and you're getting to witness police brutality on a large scale against a largely ethnic minority housing project, that's the lens through which it's shot. And we are now, in the last 5 years, getting to see this a great deal. That we had been misled into thinking that these things had gone away, when in fact it's just that no one was shining a camera on them. When you have the element of the I guess the good old white boys in Pennsylvania going around hunting zombies for fun, and they could well even be the same characters who are in Night of the Living Dead, going along with the sheriff, doing the exact same thing. These kinds of people, the kinds of people that see conflict and bloodshed as something to celebrate, as a reason to get together and have a drink or two and go out shooting. And with things like, God, I mean, if I want to get really American, things like storming the Capitol earlier this year, that's not too dissimilar to bikers storming a shopping mall just to get what's inside. And then when they get inside, and this is the crucial thing in Dawn of the Dead, and I mentioned this in my essay for the book, and it's exactly the same almost with our 4 protagonists, but when the bikers get in, they don't take anything of value. And this is where I'm going to get on my political high horse for a moment. When you have your insurrectionists storming the Capitol, they are in the seat of power, in theory. They could do all kinds of horrific shit, couldn't they? And they could have. And there were people very frightened that they would. And people were hurt, and people did die. No getting away from that. But it could have been a hell of a lot worse. And they were allowed to get away with a hell of a lot worse. But what they instead did, as soon as they got inside, they started acting like children. Yeah, there's those famous photos of when they were marching through the gallery, essentially, with all these statues and paintings of former presidents. They never left the red carpet and the tour ropes. They never actually vaulted the ropes. Once they were inside, they just took the tour, basically, and defecated on desks. Now, what's interesting about that, when I compare it to something like Dawn of the Dead and the way it presents that kind of siege mentality, being the besiegers and the insurrectionists, the looters, whatever, is when the bikers storm the shopping mall, they could have it made just the same as our 4 protagonists could have had it made. They could have got in, sealed up, built a castle, lived the good life. But all they're interested in is taking rings, taking their blood pressure for some inexplicable reason, smashing pies into faces of zombies, and it's ludicrous. People look at that part of the movie, and a lot of people look at that part of the movie as when Dawn of the Dead goes off a cliff. Essentially, it's no longer fun when the bikers arrive. But it's the thing I disagree with entirely, because they are doing exactly what the zombies were doing, which is exactly what our 4 protagonists were doing. It just goes to show that the people presented in this movie, which is a dark reflection but not entirely inaccurate of how people actually are, is when you get access to all that good stuff, you just take it and you ruin it, and then you march out and you leave your friends. None of them try and help each other. None of them try and help each other escape. And they're not even aware of the zombies around them by the time they're slipping their arm in a blood pressure cuff. There is no reason for it except it's there to do it. And so I think you can look at something like the insurrection, the attempted insurrection, through that exact same lens as that biker scene from Dawn of the Dead. It's the same idiots who, once they've got in, they don't know what they're going to do with themselves. So they just ruin it for everybody. And then they get mashed up by zombies in Dawn of the Dead, or by the police eventually in the court system in our world. So yeah, I think Dawn of the Dead is plenty pertinent in today's society.
Right. I want to give you a chance, but I'm 52. I have to get a thought out of my head, or it's gone. And it's funny that in some ways, in 2021, Dawn of the Dead is a political film that in some ways kind of transcends the normal political divide, because the stuff about race and police brutality and economic issues, it's all there. There's no denying it. But if you watch that first 40 minutes of the film, especially with 2020 eyes, it's about the government completely botching a pandemic. And whenever George was asked about, what's the political message of your zombies movies, George's go-to answer for 50 years was, the government will let you down. The people in power will stick it to you. And that's if talking about race and economic and disparities is more of a left thing, skepticism about the government is more of a right thing. So he's made a film that actually touches upon a great broad spectrum of political concerns, I think, and that speaks to the film's genius. Now, Aid, why do you like Dawn of the Dead?
Dawn of the Dead. I don't know why. It's definitely one of my favourites, that's for sure. Funny enough, I actually do like the biker scene. So I like you say, the bikers showed up and just basically being complete morons and doing what they want to do. That kind of sums up although it does very much heavily remind me of like the bikers from Any Which Way But Loose, which also just seem to be driving around and doing what they want to for no apparently good reason as well.
That is a comparison I've never heard before, but
yeah, crossover we need, man.
So it's quite cool. But yeah, I like the bleakness of it. I like the idea of there is definitely some kind of comedy nod to stuff. But yeah, out of any zombie film I think I've seen, that is probably the one I would tag up there as being the best one I'm currently aware of. Let's just say that, because I'm sure there's a few out there I've not seen.
I'd just like to throw something in here, a bit of shade, I guess, onto the Zack Snyder remake of Dawn of the Dead. Because yes, I saw it in the cinema. I saw it in the cinema twice, and I remember loving it. It was a real sit-down popcorn movie, but it has absolutely no depth. It has no human angle to it. It is a zombie movie. It isn't a human movie with zombies in, and it's often compared to 28 Days Later, which does what it does far better. Because again, the thing that I try not to sound too pretentious, but the layman looks at a movie like 28 Days Later, and as soon as the military are introduced 2/3 of the way through, that's when they lose interest, because now it's no longer about the infected, it's about the military. But it's through that prism or that lens that the rest of the movie starts making sense, that the human struggles actually matter. In Dawn of the Dead, the remake 2004, I think, you just get none of that. There's no meaningful interaction whatsoever between any of the protagonists, and certainly with any outsiders. I think the most interesting outsider is Andy, who runs the gun shop, and he doesn't have any depth. He's just a man that holds up signs, and I think that says it all. Really, there's just nothing like that. It's a perfectly shallow, enjoyable movie, but when compared to the original, it's pales. There's nothing to it at all.
I feel like the only real memorable part from the remake is like that first 10 or 15 minutes. Like the opening sequence packs a pretty good punch, but the rest of it, just, like you said, doesn't hold a candle to the original.
I credit Johnny Cash for that.
And that was when Johnny Cash was just being reborn through Rick Rubin. So that was a good time to play some Johnny Cash in your opening sequence.
Well, if any of y'all, if any of y'all else want to have anything you want to say about the remake, that's fine. But to me, the remake, it's style and no substance. That was kind of part of buying a movie ticket in the 21st century for the most part. The thing that got me was, and yes, I'm going to spoil this 20-year-old movie, is, to me, it's kind of a crime against your audience to kill off your protagonists during the closing credits in like a mid-credit scene.
Yeah, that is pretty sneaky. Pretty sneaky.
Yeah, I mean, of all the things Zack Snyder has done, I have not cared for. To me, that's just a middle finger at your audience, regardless of what film you're trying to make. That right there, I don't care for anything, to see anything else this guy ever made. And then of course he gets the keys to DC, so I should stop saying things like that.
Well, I think the thing that irritates me the most about Dawn of the Dead 2004 is, what is it, Jake Weber's, I think that's the actor's name, character Michael, who is, I guess, the co-lead. It's at the end where he reveals he's been bitten, and I'm thinking, all of these other survivors that you have let die just so you could get to the docks and say, I've been bitten. I lose all sympathy for him at that point, because good old CJ, I clearly care about these things, played by Michael Kelly, who basically says, I'll stay behind and detonate this canister of flammable gas so that you can escape. And Michael just says, sure, and runs off, despite the fact he's already been bitten by that point. You don't even get that from the most nihilistic characters in Romero's movies. You don't get someone who's already been bitten saying, yeah, well, fuck you, to the other characters. You get plenty of people that pretend they haven't been bitten, but they don't push other people in the way after they're already doomed.
All right, John, what do you think of the remake? And is your response going to make us glad we have an adult content warning on this?
Well, I will say, like Matthew, I watched it in the theater probably more than once. I didn't think it was a complete travesty. If you want to see a complete fucking travesty, there we go, now we've earned that content warning. If you want to see a complete travesty, look at any of the Day of the Dead remake attempts. There have been multiple ones. I tried watching one, the others I didn't even bother with. Those are real travesties. So I mean, there is some talent in the Dawn of the Dead remake, and I do think that opening sequence is kind of pulse pounding, when they wake up and the young child is in the house and everything goes to shit, and they kind of pull back and you see how just the scale of everything that's going on right before Johnny Cash comes on. But for the most part, like we've said, it's style with no substance, it's flash with no heart. I don't hate it, but it's not what I go to when I want to watch a zombie movie.
Now, Ethan, if there's no mind of me taking a little flashback here, I think I've always thought you were just a fabulous human being. And the moment that I think you really stole my heart was the first time that Aaron and I spent like 25 minutes ripping a movie to shreds, and there would be a beat, and you'd go, I kind of liked it. So but okay, what do you think of the remake?
I kind of liked it. I did not see it in theaters. I saw it after, and when it came out, I was not a connoisseur of horror films or anything like that. I don't think I'd even seen I think I'd only seen the original Night of the Living Dead at that point. And so I saw that one before I saw the original Dawn of the Dead. And it's the remake is what it is. It's a Hollywood popcorn movie. I think Matthew and John have pretty much said it's a popcorn film. That's what you're going there for. You're not there to have an intellectual discussion about anything. It's just about zombies attacking the mall and then popping some popcorn, having a good time, and watching zombies do their thing. But when you go back and see the original, it's got a lot more meat on the bone to it. And the remake is fine. It is what it is. It's not something that I would go out of my way to watch, but also not something that I would actively want to set on fire and keep people from watching. I think it's fine. I liked it just fine. As to which version I like the best, I think I don't know which cut of the original Dawn of the Dead I've seen, but I just remember I watched it on a really crappy TV that the sound on the TV was coming out of a coffee can. Crank it up all the way to hear anything. I as someone who enjoys film and enjoys stories like that, I like the original definitely better. I like it has more substance to it, definitely has more depth to it. But then sometimes you don't want that substance. You don't want to have that social commentary, sort of sitting on top of everything going, I want to teach you a lesson about, race relations and consumerism. It's like, no, I just want to watch zombies eat people, and watch stuff blow up real good. And I think that is definitely where the remake comes in and fills that niche just fine. I've never been one to say that any sequels or any remakes ruin the original. That I think people who think that way are a little obtuse, because no one, yes, we have, the remake of Dawn of the Dead, and if you say, oh, this is terrible, it's just ruined the whole franchise for me. I argue well, what has it done to the original that has changed it? Did Zack Snyder come to your house with a gun and say, give me your old copy of Dawn of the Dead and here's your new one? No, you always have the original to go back to. You always have that it's your original love, and you can have them. You can like them both for different reasons. There's no problem with that. So yeah, that's where I stand on it.
All right, Aid or Aid is Dawn your favorite zombie movie, or is there a close second for you?
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely I think I saw that one before the original actually as well. So
wow.
I could be wrong, but I think that's highly possible. I know, because obviously going back and saying, well, the original's in black and white. Oh, okay. And it's okay, my God, this is really good. But yeah, I do like black and white movies, so I've learned my lesson since then. So, but yeah, I think it is. I think out of all of the ones I've seen, but again, I saw the 2004 remake on DVD because I bought it. I was working at a shop that was selling DVDs at the time, so I just picked it up on the whim. Okay, I love that. It was okay. It's fine. It wasn't as good as the other one, but it's just another one to add to the collection kind of thing. But I don't think I can think of anything recently in the last 10 years that I would even think of picking up zombie movie wise that would even come close to Dawn of the Dead. So yeah, I think it's got to be way up there on the list easily. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, it's a very rare privilege for me to be in a room full of zombie and Romero fans, and so I have to ask this distinguished panel a question about the original that I always sticks with me. The first one, the original Night of the Living Dead, justifiably praised, in the Museum of Modern Art, Library of Congress, deserves everything it's gotten, and from the beginning, people discussed the very obvious thing that, especially for a film made in 1968, you have this African-American protagonist. And there's always been, I think, a very justifiable belief that the film, at least subtextually, is about racial issues, especially during 1968. But to his dying day, George Romero said, no, I hired the best actor, and it just turned out he was African American. Okay, now we're trying to read the minds of a dead man here. Okay, all right. Does anybody buy George's story? Does anybody believe that there was absolutely no thought of race in his mind when he cast that movie?
Knowing how political his other films that followed, specifically Dawn and Day, were,
Mm-hmm.
I do have a hard time feeling that he didn't at least have it in the back of his mind. I mean, Dwayne Jones may very well have been the best actor that they auditioned, but I would be surprised if that was not at least a thought in his mind as he was approaching the film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't want to I don't want to question something. He is, as you say, he said it multiple times that Dwayne Jones was just the best person for the role. But I feel as if, and maybe I'm projecting my hopes here, that if Dwayne Jones hadn't been hired, then some of the one or more of the other characters wouldn't have been white. Because what George A. Romero did repeatedly through his movies was show a colorful cast, quite frankly, and a cast comprising many genders as well. And while Night of the Living Dead, sadly, the women in Night are largely futile. That they do play scream queens for the most part, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, we look at it through the lens of how movies were back then, horror movies. After Dawn, especially with Dawn, Fran is basically the intelligent one. Day, we have a female lead. You know, it's absolutely a female lead. And you know, and so it goes with Land of the Dead, and if you want to include Diary of the Dead. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know that. I don't think he was necessarily trying to say my lead is a black man, therefore the bad people in this movie have to all be white. But I like to think that George A. Romero was switched on enough to diversity that he would have ensured that it wouldn't have just been an all-white cast if it hadn't been the actor that we ended up with.
Anybody else want to take a guess whether or not you buy George's story? I am inclined to believe it too, just simply because George never really shied away from talking about this is where my film is political, this is where it's not. And also, and I say this with love and respect to Judith O'Dea and Carl Hardman and everybody else, Dwayne kind of is the best actor in the movie. You know, he really does. He's and I love the movie. He really does have something the rest of the cast just doesn't. So I, you know, to me, to watching the film, I kind of think he's on there. Okay.
No, I believe him. I would probably, I would say Romero definitely is the one. I would say, it's one of those things that somebody probably brought up after the fact. He's like, yeah, totally. But honestly speaking, he had no money and he needed a good actor and he could afford that actor, and so that actor made it in the movie. I think beggars can't be choosers, you know. So he can't like, well, I don't want this actor, I want that guy instead. It's like, well, this guy's really good, I want him. So I think that may have been a happy accident type of thing. But, yeah.
All right. So I have one other great grandiose thought here that I could get out in the last 5 minutes, and I just wanted to observe as I was going back and reviewing things in the genre. You go back to 1932, like with stuff like White Zombie, and you see a thread running all the way up till at least when Hammer does Plague of the Zombies, that zombies are clearly a metaphor, but they are a metaphor for the oppressed working class. You know, right from when Bela Lugosi is forcing them to work in his sugar mills, all the way up to that thing being transplanted to England in Plague of the Zombies. And maybe the most remarkable thing about Night and especially Dawn is the way that it flips the metaphor. it's no longer the oppressed working classes, it's these happy fat consumers. It has gone from being a voice from the powerless, that are under this oppressive hand, to the people that are kind of enslaving themselves with this pursuit of materialism and things like that. And it's it's a great testament to how flexible the metaphor is and how it has kind of traveled along with our culture and our economy and our changing times. And kind of makes me think that 100 years from now they'll still be talking about zombie movies.
It makes me wonder, because when you look at the protagonists in each of these movies, Night of the Living Dead is a fairly it's the simplest of all of them, and you don't get much detail about the protagonists other than to assume they are largely working class through to office drone. Harry Cooper seems like he's probably working in an office somewhere, but in a horrible job that really makes him angry all the time. But when it comes to Dawn of the Dead and then Day of the Dead, you start seeing the protagonists, and they are presented from a professional view, almost. And it's one of those interesting what ifs of what if George A. Romero had decided to explore this more. So in Dawn of the Dead, you have two cops essentially, and you have two media individuals. In Day of the Dead, you have scientists and you have military. In Land of the Dead, you do very much have working class versus upper class. And in Diary of the Dead, you basically have students. Whether you consider Diary of the Dead part of the canon or not, I don't think most people do at this point, but he always seems to he wants to take it from a different point of view. But despite that, it almost feels like that's a function that he needs as a director and a writer, to say, well, where are these characters going to come from? What would be interesting? Okay, well, I'll make this person a helicopter weatherman, and his scheduler, girlfriend, fiance. But they never, after they land in the Mall, they never talk about work. They never talk about, wow, what an opportunity this would be to film these, or what would this look like on the screen. They never again refer to anything about their life before they were in the Mall. And the same goes for the cops, well, the SWAT team, basically. So it's like an entry point. He always tries to present characters from an interesting entry point, but as soon as they have sort of entered the apocalyptic angle, everything but before that is irrelevant. It never gets brought up. And this is pretty much the same for all of them. We don't know how the characters in Day of the Dead ended up in that bunker, why they specifically are there. We just know that there is a helicopter pilot. I'm not even sure what is Jarlath Conroy's character supposed to be in Day of the Dead, other than a drunk Irishman. A mechanic, I guess, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it's interesting how he presents his protagonists strongly in one way, and then just completely loses interest as the movie goes on in what they were.
Well, I wonder how much of that would be based on real people's reaction to being in a situation like that. I mean, if you're in a situation where society is completely crumbled, are you going to identify yourself as the middle manager at the bank who hates his job and comes home and argues with his wife every night? Or are you going to try to find yourself some way to redefine yourself?
That I think is a really interesting question, because we mentioned Dawn of the Dead 2004, and in that movie, which we accept is a much more shallow experience, the characters constantly identify themselves by their professions. That we have the nurse or doctor, we have the police officer, we have the street thug, and so on, and that is all they are throughout the movie. So it can be done, and I'm sure it's been done in many other zombie movies, where you are just seeing the character as their profession before and after. But for whatever reason, Romero just doesn't. He boils them down to humans and zombies, and occasional biker gangs.
And it's since it's 3:58, I want to give everybody a chance to say goodbye, but I'd throw one last thought out there. Is maybe the ultimate hidden horror of the zombie film the draw that there are some people whose lives right now are so miserable and unfulfilling, the thought of being in a zombie apocalypse and being important and or suddenly being more important than you are, and not and not having to worry about the drudgeries of your average life, that seems like an upgrade to so many people. The number of people who talk about a zombie apocalypse with just a little too much gleam in their eye, because we've met them, we know them.
It's I don't know. I think it's no different than preppers for nuclear apocalypse, or or a biblical apocalypse. It's just zombie movies give us another paradigm through which to navigate our doomsday fantasies of what person hasn't spoken to their friends about how would you survive a zombie apocalypse. Well,
right, and that's it. There is it's just another scenario they can use to think of, what would I do if there were no consequences?
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Right. Well, I promised everybody I would not go past an hour, so I've got 20 seconds left. Anybody have a quick closing thought before we say goodbye? Okay. All right. Well then.
I've got one.
Okay,
one,
please.
And I'm sure most people have seen this movie, but if they haven't, everyone should watch Train to Busan. Because
yes.
most horror movie fans will have seen Train to Busan by now. But if you, for whatever reason, haven't, maybe because it's Korean and you don't like subtitles, please give it a watch anyway. It is a fantastic zombie movie, in my view, probably the best modern zombie movie in my view. And beyond that, look up They Came From Beyond the Grave on back. You can just type "They Came From Beyond the Grave" RPG into Google, and still, I think you'll get the PDF early if you back now. People have already been getting theirs, and I would really appreciate it.
Yes, and it is fantastic. I highly recommend it. All right, Ethan, closing thoughts?
I'm gonna have to check out that They Came From Beyond the Grave now. So
yes, I can't beat that. All right, Aid, closing thoughts? Any projects coming up we should look for?
Just thank you for mentioning Train to Busan, because I could not for the life remember what that film was called when I was trying to think of what the recent zombie films were, and that was the one I was thinking of. So that's it. Projects upcoming, nothing at the moment. Working on some bits and bobs, but nothing to talk of at the moment. So thank you for asking.
All righty. All right. And John, again, thank you so much for making this thing possible. Closing thoughts, things you want to plug?
My pleasure. I'll just throw out a couple more recommendations then. If you want to see a low-budget zombie movie that gets it right, check out a movie from, I think, 2012 called The Battery. Other ones that maybe people haven't seen, Pontypool is underseen and deserves a view. And
fantastic choice.
It's not a great movie, but I would recommend checking out Nightmare City. Umberto Lenzi. Arrow Video put out a DVD or a Blu-ray with 2 different restorations of it, and it's a stupid, gory, fun film.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I will end with my recommendation. If you, when we talk about zombie films being great for gore and for political context, I got to speak up for 1974 Sugar Hill.
Oh, yeah.
A young African-American woman of Haitian descent embraces the voodoo tradition to team up with Baron Samedi to resurrect a bunch of zombies to kill an old evil white Southern crime boss. So lots of satisfying gore and deaths and all the politics you could hope for, and a nice shout out to where the genre started. Well, I've gone over. Thank you all for staying with us to the very end. And thanks, Ethan, John, Aid, Matthew, for joining us on the show here. We'll be back around Halloween time to talk about Frankenstein and mad scientists. And until then, wish you all a scary good time. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for joining us on the Ghost Show podcast. I'm Professor Christopher McLaughlin, and I am out. Thank you. Goodbye. And now here's the